Well, good evening. I thank you for joining me tonight. In this edition, I want to share with you my own Christian journey, and I want to share a little more about some of the different shades of candles. If we were to liken Anglicanism to a candle, some of the different sort of segments within Anglicanism. So there's high church Anglicanism. There's the middle of the road, essentially, which would be called broad church. And then there is low church Anglicanism. Okay, so high church Anglicanism, you would find people who were more Anglo-Catholic. Their worship would be more formal. In the broad church in the middle would be a mixture of very formal but also somewhat informal. And then low church Anglicanism would be in some ways closer to the Presbyterian church. And there were Puritan separatists who would have been low church Anglicans who wanted it to look more like just a regular church service. No priestly vestments, no episcopos, no bishops, only presbyters and deacons. And so it would have looked more like a Presbyterian church. So you had high church, which is more Anglo-Catholic, middle of the road, which is called broad church, and then you had low church Anglicanism, which was much more informal. One thing to point out, if you wonder why pastors in the Anglican, Lutheran traditions and Methodist traditions and Roman Catholic and others wear the collar, there was a period in the 17 and 1800s, probably even in the early 1900s, when the shirt for a man was the collar detached from the shirt. So that would make the shirt last longer because a shirt, typically the collars wear out. But essentially what happened was those who worked in the business sector would wear some kind of a tie. They would take the collar off. And to designate the role of clergy, they just turned the collar around. And it was just a wraparound this way without the tie in the middle. And then people knew this person is a clergyman. So also in worship, in the Old Testament, in the temple, there were formal liturgical garments that God required the priests to wear, the pastors to wear, what we call pastors today, or presbyter, overseer, or priest, however you want to use that term. And then we see in the synagogue that the person who was teaching would often wear some kind of prayer shawl, like a stole around their head and their neck. And so in the New Testament, many Christian traditions want the priest to vest when he is in his ministerial office to show that in this moment he is doing the work of Christ. That is why in many Christian traditions they wear vestments in worship services and clerical collars to identify them as clergy when they're in the public. Now, costumes and uniforms are nothing new. Football players wear costumes. Baseball players wear outfits, right? Uniforms. Football, policemen. We wouldn't think of, if a policeman pulled up in an unidentified outfit, you wouldn't know he was a policeman, right? Policemen have a badge, they have a uniform, they have a police car. Firemen, the same thing, they have a uniform. Judges wear black robes, they have a uniform. So throughout society, people wear uniforms to designate their role. When the UPS man pulls up or woman pulls up to your house, they're not wearing jeans and a t-shirt. They have a dark khaki outfit on with the UPS label, right? So for those who wear clerical garments, it is to identify that you are a member of the clergy. So that's part of the reason for vestments and clerical garb. So personally, I can appreciate high church worship conservative, biblically based Anglo-Catholicism with all the smells and bells. Within Anglicanism, there was a movement in the 1800s called the Oxford Movement. I just want to give you a couple of these shades of the candles so that you'll understand better. The Oxford Movement had a desire to reaffirm the literal biblical Christian faith that avoids pseudo-rationalism, because rationalism, like a false rationalism, was entering the church. And the Oxford Movement wanted to bring people back to true rationality, a true biblical interpretation, without these progressive liberal ideas that were not biblical entering in. Okay? There was also a move away from the episcopacy, and so the Oxford Movement wanted to regain the episcopacy. They wanted to regain an orderly worship, especially after so much nonconformity in the early days of the founding of the Protestant Episcopal Church in America. So what you had was when the new colonies came to be in the United States, the Anglicans came over, but they could not have a church connected to the British Crown because our country was seeking its own independence. So the Protestant Episcopal Church was formed in the late 1700s, and the Episcopal Church did not go over that well in New England, primarily because this is where the Revolution started, right? They wanted to make a break from England, and there were many Anglican priests who came over, who became part of the new Episcopal Church, and they were loyal to the crown. And you can see how that went over like a lead balloon with the Patriots. So the Episcopal Church in the USA really took root in the Virginia colony, and because it was largely English. The Roman Catholic Church took root in Maryland, and the Presbyterian and Reformed Church took root in New York and also in New Jersey. These are generalities. You also find a very strong presence of the Episcopal Church in the South as well, because there were more English that settled there, particularly in Virginia, North Carolina, and South Carolina, and other places. So in their book, an excellent book, How Pascoe, and then also J.I. Packer, their interpretation of and understanding of true Anglicanism. Both of these sets of authors, Howe and Pascoe, as well as Packer, both set out to present a more low church Anglicanism, an Anglicanism sort of prior to the Oxford Movement. The early Protestant Episcopal Church in America really would have looked more like the Presbyterian Church does today. A little less formal, a little less guided by strict interpretation of the prayer book and all that, though it did follow the prayer book and the rubrics and the propers. So Pascoe, Packer, and Howe are going to present a the more Puritan side of Anglicanism, while the Oxford Movement, they're going to present a more Catholic side of Anglicanism. And one of their leaders ended up becoming Roman Catholic because he felt that Anglicanism was not Catholic enough for him. Okay? So it's interesting that the Puritans, though evangelical and Anglican, were opposed to vestments. They wanted to purify English worship of any vestige that they considered Roman. And this is from Pritchard's book, A History of the Episcopal Church. Personally, I appreciate vestments. I see their place in worship. I was raised in a high church Protestant church the first 10 years of my life, so I appreciated that. I was an acolyte, so I wore a robe, and there were two of us. We'd go down front and light the candle and go back out and then come back in and put the candle out. And I appreciated the stained glass windows. And, I like when I go into a church for it to feel like a different space. You go into a church to worship God. I don't want the church to look like a shopping mall, right? And that's part of the reason I'm drawn to Anglicanism. Christianity now in America, it has just been so stripped of so many parts of its tradition that are rich and that are helpful. You can say, well, none of that's necessary. Well, you could also say, it's not necessary to have Thanksgiving, or it's not necessary to, go climb a mountain, or go to the beach, or enjoy the beauty of the earth, right? You could say none of that's necessary, but is it helpful? Does it increase your love of God and of nature? Absolutely. Can it be turned on its head and be made the object of worship? Yeah, at times it can. But this can also happen in the contemporary church as well, with all the imagery and the projected imagery in the contemporary churches, with the electronic walls, computer walls. I forgot what they call them, but you could say, well, is that necessary, right? So all of these are aids, right? Whether they be vestments, whether they be chants or incense or whatever it might be. These are all helpful aids in worship. Again, are they necessary? They're not necessarily necessary. Are they helpful? Yes, they can be helpful in our worship of God. And as you read through the book of Revelation, you see all kinds of things. You see robes. You see incense being burned. You hear just unimaginable, angelic voices. All of this, if you read through the book of Revelation. And many liturgical churches are seeking to make worship look more like you're in the throne room of heaven than going to a mall or some rock concert, which is sort of what many evangelical churches, unfortunately, have become, right? Pastors hopping around on the stage in skinny jeans and a black t-shirt. Is that really beneficial, right? You may say, well, I don't like a pastor wearing a robe or more formality. Well, is that any better, right? That's just really kind of dumbing down, I think, Christianity, and it makes it cheap in many ways. So anyway, that's just a part of the history of Anglicanism. It is a more formal form of worship. It is very much connected to the early church. It has a very rich theological base, which many churches today, quite frankly, have simply moved away from. Many Christians today don't know the history of the church. They don't know what a creed is, that it was actually written to protect the church against heresy. So what I find most important, as do the authors that I just talked about, is that practitioners in all branches of the Anglican faith be true believers who want to worship God in spirit and in truth, no matter what the package looks like. That's the most important thing. That we know God, that we love Him, that we make Him known, that we make disciples of the nations, and that we love one another as Christ has taught us to love each other. By this, Jesus said, all men will know that you are my disciples. So what kind of led me into an interest in Anglicanism? My wife and I were attending a Southern Baptist church in Cincinnati, Ohio, right after college. And one Sunday morning, I was running late. She couldn't make it. And I thought, I'll just go to this church that was a block away. It was a beautiful little stone church with the red door, with the pointed door. And it was charming little place. I went in and I found a group of spirit-filled Episcopalians who loved Jesus. They were conservative. They were biblically based. And so while we loved our Southern Baptist church, it was about 30 minutes away. We found over time that it was a good fit for us. And so we began attending. And I was interested in going into the ministry. So I inquired the rector, the pastor there. I asked him about seminary and about ordination. And he was about to retire, and he discouraged me because he said the bishop of Southern Ohio at the time was progressive and liberal and unbiblical. And so he discouraged it. And so I just sort of put that idea out of my head for the time. And I knew that the Episcopal Church at the time was very liberal, was very progressive. And this was in 1990. So now the Episcopal Church has essentially split, and many different Anglicans have left the Episcopal Church and formed new, conservative, biblically based Anglican churches and Anglican denominations. Okay. Now the Episcopal Church USA, the liberal mainline, is down to 1.6 million members, and it's diminishing every day. Okay. While the global Anglicans, the conservative biblically based continuing movement within Anglicanism, is actually growing and expanding. So in the early 1900s, I went to we moved down to Wake Forest, North Carolina, just north of Raleigh, and I went to Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary after completing an art degree at the Art Academy of Cincinnati. My wife and I got involved with Cru, which is Campus Crusade for Christ. I served as the campus director at Duke University doing campus ministry, as well as working at a Presbyterian church that was Korean as pastor of second generation. We moved on from there to pastor a church in Bavaria, Germany. After that, we came back to the United States, pastored in Lewiston, Maine, at a very formal Baptist church, which was beautiful, stone, stained glass windows, all of that. And I did a doctorate of ministry at Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary. And then we set out on a journey after that. The missions bug had bitten us, and we went back to Europe to serve a church in the mountains above Nice, France, for several years. After that, we returned to the United States, pastored a large church in Midcoast, Maine, and in 2021, we planted Midcoast Christian Fellowship. Following that, I did a Master of Theological Studies at an independent Lutheran seminary in Orthodox Lutheran theology and a certificate in Anglican Studies from Trinity Anglican Seminary, which was formerly an Episcopal seminary, which left because of the theological liberalism. Some of my own personal mentors over the years, as far as those sort of books and things that I've read that I've not necessarily met, were J.I. Packer, R.C. Sproul, John Stott, as well as some of the scholars that I studied under, one in particular, Gordon Conwell, David Wells, and then a British Anglican that I never met, but I've read some of his books, Os Guinness. So these have been some of the influences on my own life. I've also drawn spiritual insights from Christian apologists like Norman Geisler, J.P. Moreland, Gary Habermas, who I've met with personally over time. He discipled me. And he's written a number of books on the resurrection, on the Shroud of Turin. He's also debated many famous atheists around the world. And so, yeah, currently to stay fresh theologically and spiritually, I try to enter different study programs on a short-term basis just to keep myself sharp and up to date. And really, I think the Lord wants us to continue to grow, to love Him with heart, soul, and mind, and to love our neighbor as ourselves. So this second video I've just done just is a little bit about my own interests, my own theological and spiritual journeys. And so, I'd like to start an Anglican mission on the side in addition to our wonderful church fellowship, Midcoast Christian Fellowship. And I'm hoping that the Lord will raise up people here in Midcoast, Maine that will want to be a part of this new Anglican mission, as well as Midcoast Christian Fellowship. So thank you for listening. In the next video, we will look at just some different questions in regard to Anglicanism, such as how has your sense of Anglicanism expanded through your engagement with its study? What questions remain unsettled for you about Anglicanism? Reflect on your own experience how you have had with different other groups in the Christian world, interdenominational or intra-Anglican. Consider your own local Anglican church community. How well do you feel it approaches or aligns with your own interpretation and study of Anglicanism? So we're going to get into that more in the next video, just answering some basic questions, and then hopefully that'll be helpful for you. So thanks again for spending the time with me. May God bless you richly.